Hello everyone. Today I would like to present my research proposal for the AUSN's PhD program. Currently, this early morning I discussed with Darrell and I choose this topic, and I would like to hear any one of the suggestion and as well to develop my PhD proposal for the AUSN. Currently, I selected the title for the translating the ethical imperative into practice for the sustainable energy mining and the developments. Firstly, I would like to start for my outline of the research proposal. At first, I would like to start with the background research motivations and as well as what's the problem or statement and the research question so far. Currently, I have and how the significance of this research will help for the local community or the society. And the second one is the energy options for the developments. And the third one is the ethical foundations of the energy for all. And the fourth one is the mining and development conditions in Myanmar. And the fifth one is the transparency and the right for the people to be involved in the development choices. And the sixth is currently so far what I was done. For my PhD as well, the data captures and the research method for the proposal, and the seventh is so far state I'm working on analysis of the keywords used in the newspaper and what the conditions they are mentioned in the newspaper. And the session 8 I would like to discuss more, but currently I just put some preliminary findings and the result of this analysis. And the 9 and 10 sessions is about the discussions and the conclusions and recommendations. And the last 2 sessions will be the research limitations and the suggestions for the future research, and the others is references so far what I used. Maybe I would like to go back for the titles because some professor just came in. So today I would like to present this title, translating the. Yes. And so far is I started with my background, and in the recent year in Myanmar, the militarizations and the large scale of the resource extractions and as well as the infrastructure developments are destroying the natural environment. That's really threatened to the local people and the environments. So how this extractive industry transparency initiative report, it means the company, they have to declare their tax as well as their income and everything of their activities with the government as well. So from this report, they mentioned that from the resource user and from the project cited, how these resource income have been used for the sustainable developments in the community. It is not unclear in Myanmar for a long time ago. So my research question is, what is the role of these kinds of extractive industry transparency initiative, EITI standard? This is together with the ethical imperative into the practice for the sustainable energy, mining and the developments in Myanmar. And also I would like to contribute these ethical practice together for the sustainable developments for these kinds of globalized standards, which means this standard has been standardized in the over 57 countries around the world for the oil and gas mining and as well as the fishery industries for their transparency and the accountability sheets. So in Myanmar, currently we have a national electrification rate is less than 25%. So how these natural resources and the ethical foundations for these kinds of transparency and the initiative or these extractive industry extractions of the natural resources have been transferred from starting from the less military region to the democratic regions. Just started the President Deng announced and signed in the early year of the 2012 to know these kinds of natural resources income and how these resources have been used for Myanmar other sectors for the development, and as well as there's some problems in the mining and the development of the Myanmar, and as well as in the Myanmar mining sector, it's not developed as well like in the oil and gas sector, but their foreign income is as much as low, not like the oil and gas. So in Myanmar, oil and gas is the first major income of the foreign investments in Myanmar. So right now, currently, we have at least 7 coal mining are active in the southern and the East Asian state. So according to these active mining activities, these the people living in this area, they are distracted of the mining activity, even though they granted right to mine, but they are not unable to dispose due to the conflicts and the stable political and the business environments and the climate as well. So how these kinds of standardizations of the transparency and the right for the people to be involved in the development choice. So the previous study from the Izugar and the other scholar by the Dabi, they also mentioned that to make a transparency and the accountability agenda for the natural resources, there's a lot of problems and the challenges. So in this case, the research focus on the transparency and the accountability issues is only in the natural resources sectors to the governance system of at a national level. So in this case, how these standards of the EITI have been established in Myanmar for the transparency and the accountability in the oil and gas mining and industry, so for to help to produce the information that is useful for the policymaker. And to analyze the kinds of EITI innovative idea into Myanmar, so far what I did is I collected the several documents to do for the triangulations, and I firstly analyzed the data from the newspaper. And this is the data sample, how I choose the newspapers altogether, include the 101 issues published in the 3 daily newspapers from the year 2010 to the 2015, because EITI standards start introduced in Myanmar is in the year 2012. So I would like to cover how these ideas have been diffused into Myanmar society. And I analyzed by using a software package of the SimStat and the WordStat program to get the keywords and the frequency of the words analysis. And maybe this is too small. This is the how I choose the newspaper for my analysis. In Myanmar, so far there's altogether 15 of newspaper published. And some are only in Myanmar language and some are in English. So for my study, I will choose written in English versions because the software cannot analyze the Myanmar keywords. So so far I choose the English newspapers. And this is the newspaper which I choose for this study analysis. They have been published in the Myanmar and the English bilingual publisher. And from the analysis of these newspapers, these 3 newspapers, starting from the year 2011 to the 2015, because in the year 2010 there is no event occur. So starting from the year 2011, the EITI idea has been diffused in Myanmar. And it's also increased since to the year 2015. So by doing these kinds of collecting of the text data, I can see there's some important issues in the newspaper, but so far I see there is no issues relating to the ethical keywords. And this also shows that there's some environmental issues in the newspapers, which is totally high within this year. And also I conducted some interviews with the different stakeholders. So according to this regard, the EITI has been introduced by the formations of the civil society organizations to introduce these kinds of ideas to the local people, which has been include over 500 organizations altogether to work for these kinds of ideas to introduce to the local people. And the second is the formations of the multi-stakeholder group discussion. It means they have many discussions all together with the stakeholders, which mean the business company who's doing the extractive activities in the mining, oil and gas, and as well as the JMGEMS company, and as well as the civil society, which is the network of 500 organizations. So these civil society directly communicate with the local people. So the formations of these multi-stakeholder platform is the first time formations in Myanmar who can involve these three stakeholders together in one table. And the last one is the involvement of from the private sector's company is currently at the first stage, the involvement is really low. We can see that from the oil and gas company, they announce their transparency of their company information is only 13 company, but is this all company which has been working in the oil and gas sector? So it means the percentage is 100%. But for the JNGEM is only 30% because 30 companies is give the information because others minings for the JNGEMs is they are working as a family business. So they don't have any documentation system and they don't have any accounting system to standardize these kinds of EITI or standardizations process. And for the discussion is the change of AITI standard in Myanmar extractive industry has encouraged looking for the reform process, but they still have one problem, that is these low adaptations of the standard with the different stakeholders and the business representative opinions is really a major problem and the major reason. So it is also important to point out the different perspective of the multi-stakeholders and the reality of these industry where the traditional knowledge working practice, they have the family in the place, like in the JMGEMS company. So as a conclusion, so far is firstly looking for the transparency in the natural resource management that gave the way to set the assembly for the practice for the developing country to apply these kinds of global standard. And second is the policy intervention is still needed. And the third one is capitalizations on these kinds of changes have to be more effort on change agents of the emerging actor, providing the institutional support to the emerging actor. And the third one is these potential change or the emerging actor in this preliminary stage is the MEITI, which means the local coordinating community. So these kinds of strong presence both in actions and the voice for the institutional change to take place in the Myanmar's extractive industry. So far is these current state they are lacking for the ethic of the local people, how these people have been suffered or how these people have facing the environmental problems, they don't include in the EITI standard. So my research they have a limitation is right now I did some case study for Myanmar only, so this result cannot be generalized across the all country. And in addition, this research is only focused on the oil and gas industry and the mining only for the institutional change and the transparency perspective. And so far, I would like to connect with the ethical issues and the approach from the ethical side of view. So far, this is the reference what I use, and so far what I written in my previous research activities. So that's all.
Yeah. Thank you. Go back to your slide so we can see. Thank you. Good. Okay, comments and questions?
Go back to the title.
Marlon.
Okay, so the title is very crucial. It directs the movement of the paper. So what do you like to achieve? What do you want to achieve based on your title?
According to this title, I would like to approach for the sustainable energy and as well as the mining and development from the ethical point of view, because for the mining activities, I saw some reference, they have some major ethical issues occurring in the ethnic group as well as in the border region.
Okay, so the end product would be, you will be proposing code of conduct for energy mining development, because that's how to translate it into practice. You recommend specific applications or codes or behavioral practices in relation to energy mining and development. That would be the product. I don't know, I have reservation with the word, with the term imperative in the language of ethics. When a principle becomes imperative, it is irrefutable and debatable. It is that's the imperative. So it limits the application of the principle. What principles are you trying to put into practice? Have you identified what principles are these?
Actually, so far I haven't done for that one, but starting from this point of view, I would like to hear the comments and the suggestions which principle I should approach from these kinds of activities.
Would you rather retain the term principle rather than imperative?
And sorry, sir, one more again.
Principle
Principle.
or rather than imperative? If it is an imperative, there must be an established reference for those imperatives. Unless otherwise, your government already have imperatives, required things that are supposed to be there to be followed. But if none, and if you are trying to identify which of the ethical principles you can translate into practice in reference to energy mining development thing.
Actually, we have, but it's not the publicized yet, so that's why I think I will approach to use the principle.
Unless the international governing bodies, they already have the ethical imperatives.
Well,
It's not no problem.
we can discuss a little. Hassan?
I must be honest, I find the topic is quite okay. I mean, as long as later in the text you explain what you mean by both the conceptual and operational, what you mean by development. By the way, the topic is, I have no problem with that. It's a good topic. The only thing, let's go slowly now. I give some comments. It's a nice document. Yeah, let's go. I mean, I have no problem. Now, let's go slowly to the text.
Text is the first one. The first.
First, okay, go. We need to also have a background, like we pointed to with the 9 in the morning. Try to have a background. Try to have a nice background before we come to the motivation, justification why you're doing the study. Try to have a nice background. It will be nice to give it originality based on the experience of the situation in my mind. Yeah, and that also perhaps we could also put the topic that you are looking at those issues of energy mining development in Myanmar. If you are looking for a particular area in Myanmar, then you can come in on the methodology. But try to put a background there based on your experience to give your document originality. And then you can come to the motivation of the study, which is based on your experiences with those things you pointed out. And then out of that background, the motivation, you can come to a research program, but you try as much as possible both the background, the motivation, and even the research program to be supported by relevant literature sources. That's one area you need to do that. And then your research questions. Out of the research program, you can come with it. But the research question also is too thin. Why can't you come? Because there are a lot of issues on mining and energy related to development and issues of material. So there are a number of issues which we put in the research questions, which later can translate them into specific objectives. Yeah, and then you come to the significance of the study, which I have no problem. Let's go slow it down. And then somewhere before you come to those issues, you need to have a section, as we talked to your colleague this morning, a kind of a section on literature review and conceptual issues, where you look at what other people have written on the same issue, within MIMA and also outside which are relevant. Support, and then try to put you on position and bring some more of theoretical issues, as with this guy from was pointed this morning here. Yeah, I mean, try to bring those theoretical issues, because these issues, I mean, they are different people have tried to analyze the situation in my mind, in terms of theories, and try to have one which is guiding your weight in your research, that one. And then from there, now, you can have also a section of methodology. In other words, your work must be structured. Put a section there. You put somewhere down there data collection there, but have a section on its own, a chapter on research methodology. And tell us, what is your research design? Is it going to be quantitative, qualitative? You are being very active asking your friends there on the research methodology. You must also reflect yourself.
Go back to the previous slide.
Yeah. So there must be, you go there, data capture, but it is no background. There must be a section. Show us your sampling procedure, how you selected those people you interviewed, or you are going to the minutes of your questionnaire, if the focus group discussion, but tell us your research design. Right? Support it with literature, how you selected your sample, why interviews, why focus group, why observations, why you use a questionnaire, those things may come there. And then your data collection. And then you must also tell us the data analysis. How do you analyze your quantitative data? Either subjecting your data to statistical analysis, descriptive, whatever, your content analysis, if you're involved in interviews or focus group discussion, show us how much data analysis. And then you come to your data representation, which you have nicely there. Try to present how the way you presented your data, support it with literature, and then discussion and data recommendations. So your work must have a structure. The structure must be sure that it's an academic research work. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question, please.
Yes, sir.
This is a good title. This is a proposal.
Yes.
This is a proposal. But in your limitation, you wrote it was past tense.
No, I thought you were saying, well, it's a proposal, or it's a...
It's some,
Yeah, it's certainly a proposal, it's not a complete paper.
limitation, you go limitation. Limitation. The study was conducted. For the study was conducted, study will be
But
conducted.
you have done it already.
Some grammatical mistakes somewhere. So, in addition to Professor Hassan, I would like to say, INRA, I for introduction, M for method, R for result, D for discussion. INRA, you have to follow this INRA. So, if it is cross-sectional study, duration of the study, you should mention how long you will the study will be continue. Who are the stakeholders? What are the dependent variables? What are the independent variables? You should find out how tools you will use to measure the community risk assessment. Is there any tools? I have to mention the data collection tools, technique, and expected outcome of the study, because it is a time frame thesis proposal.
So it is a proposal, but if
and it is a mixed method. If it is mixed method, so you can say qualitative and both qualitative, and how we can analyze it. Atlas TA software, quantitative data analysis by SPSS. So is there any association, a relationship between the input and output, and the risk assessment of the community people? So, and introduction should be your country perspective, a surrounding country perspective, and worldwide perspective. So, on the basis of this issue, I think this proposal study will be good and good study, and good result will come out, and we will see in future confirmation thesis. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, all of the professor's suggestions. I will modify, and next time I would like to present more fruitful research result.
yeah, okay.
Go back to the first part. Yeah, so it's an interesting question of research methodology and how to present in the thesis. For me, different chapters are different parts, and when we use different methodologies in each chapter, rather than putting everything, please show the outline, rather than showing having a methodology section and then methodology section A is talking about chapter 2 or let's say chapter 4. Then the next part of methodology talks about chapter 4, and then the next chapter 5. I prefer to include the methodology in the topic. So if there's a newspaper analysis, all the methods of the newspaper analysis will be there. Now, in the background, the overall concept of how you integrate all the chapters can be there, which is good. Yes. But the actual details of the method will be in each chapter as appropriate for what method was used. Because if I'm interviewing ministers, then the interview for ministers will be, the precise method will be there. If I'm interviewing the public, it will be there. If I'm studying mining and development, it will be there. If I'm looking at international documents on transparency, it will be in that chapter. So the methodology of the analysis of the international documents and the keyword analysis will be in that chapter. So each chapter is including the way that what we need as a conceptual framework is at the beginning. What links chapter 3 methods, chapter 4 methods, and chapter 5 together.
Yeah. I mean, I have no problem with what you say, but as long as those things are articulated there, I mean, when they're not articulated, whether you put it in a separate chapter, the methodology, or for each, because as long as he or he answers the research questions. So if he says he's looking at mining, in Mama, I mean, whether he put but you must also be, how did he get the information? Who was involved, as he was asking, who were the stakeholders? What techniques and method did he or did she use to collect the data? Those will be, I mean, I don't care whether you put it in chapter 1 or chapter 2, but those things must be clear, articulated, which in this case they're not. It's just a matter of style, but the things must come out.
Okay. Thank you, Maya.
Well done for your presentation. Okay, regarding this discussion, sometimes, our university and different schools, we have different methods or different formats for the thesis. And you can have a broad, sort of background, introduction, justification, problem statement, and then you have one big chapter on methodology, and then you go into that. But the way that Daryl is explaining for us to do it, it means you're going to do it almost like a paper style. That means each chapter is a paper on its own, which means each section needs to have its own conceptual framework, its own theoretical framework, its own introduction, its own discussion section, which now you've not done on each, and you've only got discussion right at the end, and only one conclusion and recommendation. So, if you've got one background, it must be an overall background right at the beginning to give someone a very broad picture of everything. And if each chapter is dealing with each research question, if you've got 5 or 4 research questions, it's a PhD, so if you've got 4 research questions and each chapter is dealing with one research question, at the introduction chapter, you must be able to marry everything at the beginning, expand on it slightly as you summarize your introduction. Then you'll be very in-depth in each chapter. And then when you come to the end, you're going to have a separate conclusions and recommendations that's pulling everything together again. But each chapter is going to be like a separate entity, which means you're going to publish each one.
Each chapter is like one paper.
Exactly. So here now we've presented one background, one conclusions, but I think it's for the sake of time and all of that, maybe we're not having that option. Because for me, I couldn't marry number 7, which was the newspapers, to any one of the problem statements, you understand? So I couldn't pick which one of your research questions was the newspaper answering. And that's just from looking at it like this. But you're going to have the opportunity when you're writing your thesis to be able to do that. So take each question, put it separately and start introducing it. Each one's having its theoretical framework. So if you've got a development theory for chapter number 3 dealing with research question number 1, you must be able to match that development theory with broad theory that you're using in the first chapter that's supported by certain literature. And then prove that theory, it must be running. So each theory within each. So it's going to feel a bit tough. So you got to think carefully about that one. So even having a diagram, I think we even said, of a conceptual framework in each one. We have to think. It's a very, very, very nice document. You've done a lot of good work. Again, it's just arrangement and presentation that's going to have to come out.
I'm looking at it. The format is already. It's just because they are just divided into numbers. That's how many chapters? 5. I think number 2 to number 5, that's your review, related literature.
Yes.
6 and 7, that's their methodology.
Not necessarily. They may research, if you interview to mining companies, it's going to go in chapter 4. Interview to international organizations would be in number 5.
You see, Marlon, that's what they've done.
Well, you're doing interviews, so you explain it in the method that you're doing. So each chapter will have a review.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
That's
That's
what
what she
So
said.
you have
So
10 chapters?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what she said.
And his own methodology, isn't it?
Yes.
Marlon is working on his thesis. He needs to prepare 15 chapters.
No, because I'm coming from APA. I wrote a book, research writing in the university.
Yeah.
That's the reference of all our research writers in the university. I'm coming from APA format. So that's why I have the intro, the review, relatively the methodologies, separate.
Now each are using a different way.
And then,
Whereby if we writing about
that's the
mining
5 chapter.
you must the methodology can come in. And
Yeah,
that's,
that's
it.
what-
And that's
So
what
that-
Mahesh was saying.
Yeah.
If you are writing, you want the style, it's a matter of putting the style, but as long as each one of them fulfills those conditions. By the way, she is there, it's not that she has only one reference list, but even some of the chapters, they don't have even a sources.
Yeah.
The data selection, the data picture, whatever, is on its own. It's not reflected in there. That was only done when she did that.
Yeah.
What we are saying is what she did. You see what I'm saying? But the only that she need to title and each chapter there, even the research question, each section, and its own a kind of answering a question, and then put some of the things there, the methodology.
Yeah.
But it looks untidy unless each one is on its own. You can't have, okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Maybe I mix with my two guidelines with the Japanese times and the American style. So that's why my presentation might be a little bit mixed up. And I just prepared this morning, so that's why I really clear up the conflict between the way of presentations, because like the Japanese time is, as Professor Marlon said, the 2, 3, 4 might be literature review, but Dara guiding and coaching me is I have to write like a different interview, but today I didn't mention that because it's just a proposal, so that's why I didn't mention. I cannot have the time to mention all of these explanations in detail. So next time I will modify according to these are all of the professor's suggestions, and I will separate out the two style of presenting, way of presentations, and as well as the writing style as well.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Thank you, Yamin. Good job. Thank you.
so much.
Take a picture, John. I'm taking pictures and I'll make a little compilation and do a presentation for you.
Thank you, Mayoshi. So we're exploring the medicinal herbs garden in Mahadol University campus. There's many different plants.
You still have the shade this time. Well done. Bad habit. They were going so fast. It was fun.
Very pretty flowers. So this collection preserves large trees and small trees. It's a fig tree. So the sense of nature is great. It's certainly cooler in the shade than it is in the heat. A water system. So this is a nice way to preserve Thai traditional plants. This has a smell. Life keeps living. The vine is normally adapted for living on top, but in this case it is also living on the ground as well, between two trees. They have numbers for easier identification. So this is a sanctuary for birds, a sanctuary for plants. Strategies for living are interesting. Clearly they're trying to stop the roots spreading around the grass.